Or Yissachar, you are a senior fellow at the David Institute for Security Policy. You are a national security analyst and an expert on Iran. Welcome.
Thank you, Carl. It's great to be with you.
This has been quite a weekend. The Ayatollah is dead. What does this mean for Iran?
Right, so this is a watershed moment for the Middle East. Certainly did rock the boat. Ayatollah Khomeini is confirmed dead by an Israeli airstrike. I have to say that the amazing intelligence that Israel possesses led to the elimination of dozens of extremely senior officials in the top levels of the Iranian leadership within the first few seconds of the operation in 3 different locations, including the heavily fortified compound of the Iranian leader. This is a joint Israeli-US operation with the goal of removing an imminent threat, as President Trump said. But we have to read between the lines and see that both Trump and Netanyahu call the Iranian people to take to the streets saying, look, this is your last chance. And indeed, we saw multiple videos. We still cannot corroborate the authenticity of these videos, but we have a good reason to believe that they are real, of Iranians taking to the streets, chanting from the windows, dancing in the streets. We have what they call modesty police, quote unquote, whose job is to arrest women who are not allegedly dressed in a sufficiently modest way. Those officers who are pushed away from metros and public places and by the masses. So we can definitely see that the Iranian people is rising to the occasion. I have to say, outnumbered and outgunned against the RGC and the Basij. And so we'll have to see where the next few days are taking us. It's quote unquote easier to bomb a nuclear site or a military strike or a military site. If you want to change a regime, that takes a whole different endeavor. And my impression is that at least the objective of significantly weakening the regime and its capabilities is being achieved right now.
The intelligence that you speak about, how we saw in the Iraq war, it took the US quite some time to find Saddam Hussein. How does this intelligence work?
Right, so obviously without going to the details, there are significant efforts by both the CIA and the Mossad and the highest levels of Israeli intelligence to get what they call operational intelligence, what the sort of target bank that serves the Air Force and other operatives while they are carrying out the mission. Obviously, if you're an F-35 pilot and you're heading to Iran, very little you can do with just ammunitions without precision intelligence. Take the Fordo strike, for example. They said that there were units there who were busy mapping the site and knowing exactly what type of bomb to drop exactly where in order to inflict the most damage. Obviously, it's useless to attack a site if you attack it with the wrong type of weapon, that you know the place, but not you don't strike the precise location. That's what happened, for example, to Israel in the Doha strike, where the Hamas leadership was convened, but not precisely in the same place that was attacked by Israel. But then right now, according to Israeli military reporters and people who speak with the military, what they claim is that in the first few seconds of the operation, there were 3 different high-level meetings in Iran, and they took the opportunity to strike all 3 of them at the same time, so that Pakpur, who is the commander of the IRGC, was eliminated, and other senior officials of the SPND, this is the high-level Iranian nuclear program, and of course the cherry on top, Ali Khamenei, who convened several of his top advisors, and all of them were eliminated together. That includes Ali Shamkhani, top advisor to the senior leader, who Israel tried to eliminate him in June and failed, and now he was eliminated together with the supreme leader. I have to say, it's quite an ambitious undertaking to take on senior leadership, a political senior leadership, above all, of a country. But I guess Israel felt, and the United States felt, that they have no choice but to do it.
I think the entire world is very impressed by Mossad, also from the pager operation. So this does not come as a surprise. However, since the 12-day war this summer, as I understand it, the top structure of the Iranian leadership has more redundancy than before. It's already set up who will replace who in case they get killed. So what does this mean for the running of the regime in Iran?
Right. So all we know, of course, is from open source intel, but the Iranians already announced that the leader, first they announced that he will be giving a speech in the afternoon. Well, he proved to be incapable of giving that speech, obviously. And then they announced that there is going to be a council that is going to succeed him in the interim period. I'm assuming that they are obviously now assuming that there will be an interim period toward the continuation of the regime. That's their operational assumption. But it remains to be seen whether or not the regime will even survive. Right now, in the June war, many of the top leaders in the IRGC, including the very top leadership of the IRGC Air Force, as you said, were eliminated. They were, of course, succeeded by other commanders. But then we cannot only look at it as a operational military undertaking. This is a serious effort to take down a regime that for 47 years has been terrorizing the Iranian people above all and the region. And I think the United States has made the decision not to pursue your everyday efforts. They have given chance to diplomacy for over 100 days. They have been negotiating quite intensively with Arakchi, the foreign minister, in Geneva, in Oman, in other places. And they ended up deciding that the Iranians' primary fundamental tactic is buying time. They kept, putting up promises that they would consider seizing uranium enrichment for a limited amount of time, and they would go back to the negotiating table with a few days later with a renewed proposal and sort of fudge the negotiation process for perpetuity. And President Trump decided that this is not the Biden administration, this is not the Obama administration, we cannot compromise on fundamental issues. And they gave them quite a clear prospect, which is: you cannot enrich uranium, you cannot strive for a nuclear weapon, you cannot continue with your weaponization program, like to mount a nuclear material on a warhead of a missile. You cannot continue to develop your ballistic missiles that are already reaching the heartland of Europe. And if you cease to do all that, and of course stop targeting your own people, stop doing all that, then we can talk. And of course the Iranians, for them, there was a no-go from the very beginning.
The massing of U.S. military forces in the Middle East is considerable. However, there are no ground forces, and there's very little public support in the U.S. for a ground invasion since the war in Iraq and since the Afghan war. So now the Ayatollah is eliminated. What does it take for Iran to overthrow its regime at this point?
It's a great question because it's far more complicated than targeting military sites, as we said. And so if you want to substitute a regime that has been ruling Iran for the past half century, it's a more complicated endeavor than eliminating a military target. And so it's a whole system of hundreds of thousands of people. IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Basij, the Iranian Army, Artesh, and of course the highest levels of the Majlis, the parliament, government, president, supreme leader, and honestly hundreds of people whose jobs are extremely vaguely described, like a senior advisor for so-and-so, deputy undersecretary for so-and-so. There are literally hundreds of people there that are whose job is to perpetuate this regime. And so there is a system in place, and in order to substitute it, you need to come up with a good plan. We have Reza Pahlavi. He's the son of Reza Shah Pahlavi, the king of the former king of Iran. He's been living in Washington D.C. for the past 40 plus years, and he offered himself not as the next king, but as a transition agent, in his words. And so he would like, at least, well, let's see if he has enough popular support. He would like to come to Iran in order to lead the transition. He's talking about a referendum on a constitution and so on. We are hundreds of steps away from that point. But it seems like the Iranian people are ready to take it on, because it's been decades of suffocating a regime that has been ruling its own people in such a cruel way. And I believe it's possible. It's just that it's far more complicated than carrying out a military strike.
What kind of support can you see for the people on the ground in Iran? What kind of support could they sort of expect from the international community?
Right, so I'll separate the US and Israel from the international community, and I'll get there. You mentioned public support in the US. Obviously, we're not talking about US boots on the ground or Israeli boots on the ground. The Iranian people will have to take it on themselves. And there is quite a shallow public conversation in the US right now led by prominent figures like Tucker Carlson, Kenneth Owens, and others who are presenting it as a zero-sum game, as if any military intervention necessarily is preceded by a 20-year endeavor of cost $3 trillion and thousands of dead American soldiers. And obviously that's not the case. The strikes in Yemen by the Obama administration, now the Venezuela operation to take out Maduro, this is not an eternal or a long-term forever war, quote-unquote, as these people are saying. So obviously it's the president's job and administration's job to mediate this to the American people, and to say that, you guys, like he said yesterday, my job is to defend the American homeland. These guys were after Americans for 47 years. They killed hundreds of American soldiers and civilians. They tried to assassinate me twice. So obviously we have an interest to moderate their sphere of influence, and in turn get to China and Russia. We're going to get there, I'm sure, later on. And so the Iranian people will have to do this on their own. What the US and Israel can do is to provide assistance, to hit headquarters of the IRGC, to eliminate top regime figures. And from that point on, I believe the Iranian people need to chart their own future.
What do you expect next from the Israeli Defense Forces and from the US military?
We're expecting a campaign that's going to last at least a few days, if not weeks. The regime obviously is now launching hundreds and hundreds of projectiles at Israel and at the Gulf countries. I have to say this is quite an unprecedented moment where Gulf countries are seeing the full wrath of the Iranian regime's capabilities. They launched drones at Dubai and Abu Dhabi, 5-star hotels near the Burj Khalifa, at Bahrain, Kuwait, and Riyadh. These countries are peaceful. They did not seek to be part of this game. But now they are seeing that the Iranian regime is not, distinguishing some moderate Arab partners and the region, or US and Israel, just because they are hosting US forces. So they are targeting really hotels and civilian targets, not just American bases, which is absolutely a testament to the cruelty of this regime, and further strengthens the impression that this regime's place is to pass from this world. And I have to say the US and Israel are carrying out a joint operation. It is possible, not sure, not certain, but it is possible that Arab countries will join, such as Saudi Arabia. They have an interest to show their own people that they are striking back and hitting back after the regime has been hitting them so hard yesterday, but also in the past few years. And I have to say something else. This is a litmus test to the international community, who is really there to support the Iranian people and to support the United States and Israel. I have to say, the reactions on the part of the United Kingdom and France and other European nations were extremely, extremely disappointing. In fact, calling to stop everything, de-escalate, and go back to the negotiating table, it's an extremely childish suggestion with this Ayatollah regime. And honestly, I'm not just talking as an Israeli analyst. I'm trying to look at it from President Trump's perspective and say, are these my allies? Western Europe, who has been allegedly around the table with me, and now when I'm taking on this regime and denying the regime capabilities such as ballistic missiles that get all the way to Europe, I'm defending also Europe by doing this. This is their reaction. So it could be like a double tongue or a dual language game on their part. But honestly, this is not the time for this. This is a watershed moment for the Middle East and for the world. And it's a litmus test for every actor on the international stage to be pro-American or anti-American. And frankly, when President Trump looks at the world map, he sees Venezuela and Maduro, he sees Iran and Ayatollah Khamenei, and he says, I'm looking at the bigger picture. I cannot obviously strike China and Russia directly, militarily, so I'm going to topple the whole structure and topple these regimes one by one, these pro-Chinese, pro-Russian regimes in Venezuela, in Iran, and elsewhere. And suddenly the pro-Chinese, pro-Russian sphere of influence is depleting. We can see it very clearly. And honestly, I think Trump is taking a very activist foreign policy trajectory that is going to serve him well in the future.
80% of the Iranian oil exports are today going to China. They're also exporting drones to Russia to sustain
Even
the war.
90%. Yes.
90%. Oh, wow. Also drones to Russia to support their war in Ukraine. What would a toppled regime in Iran mean for the global security balance?
Absolutely. So first, the Iranians reportedly announced to ships that they are not allowed to cross the Straits of Hormuz. As you know, and as you mentioned, this is the passage, the maritime passage, where much of the world's oil supply passes from Kuwait and Qatar and other places. Of course, Qatar has no oil, but these extreme, the LNG and all of the other means to produce energy, Saudi Arabia and its ports. So obviously, it's a critical route. The Iranians themselves have not certainly done that. The US for sure told ships not to pass there, and I think for good reasons, so long as tensions are extremely high. The Houthis also reportedly announced that the Bab el-Mandeb in the Red Sea, those straits will be closed, and any ship trying to pass through international waters will be targeted. So all of that is in the level of reported announcements, and it remains to be seen. But obviously, it's going to affect the stock market. It's going to affect the oil market. And there is a reason. It's a funny thing that wars in the Middle East tend to take place on a Saturday, on a weekend after the stock market's closed, when allegedly everyone is supposed to take a day like the weekend off. And we may be heading toward Monday when things will become a little more stabilized, maybe a few more days. But the Iranians will probably be deprived of much of their capabilities if it's the drone strikes of ships, if it's ground-to-sea missiles, all sorts of capabilities designed to block the straits. And when that happens, I'm sure that the U.S. will reopen this area.
After the capture of Nicolas Maduro, we saw U.S. military forces seizing oil tankers belonging to the Shadow Fleet. Here in Sweden, we also have issues with the Russian Shadow Fleet. St. Petersburg is a big port for oil export for Russia. Do you think we will see Iranian tankers being seized by U.S. forces?
It's possible. They tend to use shadow fleets, as you say, with different flags, often, without the consent of the third-party country. They are, as you know, are under sanction by the United States, and so they are not allowed, practically, they're not allowed to sell oil to any country with whom the United States is having business with. And so their way to circumvent it is to use shadow fleets, whether it is to China or other places. They're selling it reportedly for 15% discount to China, their oil exports. And so, as you said, 90% of the Iranian oil exports go to China. If Xi Jinping decides to, turn off the lights, that's it. The Iranian economy is going to collapse. And obviously he's not doing it not because China is pro-Iranian as much as it is anti-American, and they, wisely for them, concluded that supporting Iran means weakening or rather disturbing the activity of the United States. And so over in Scandinavia and Sweden, in Europe, I'm sure that some of the ramifications will be evident, but then it is also a catalyst to seek alternative routes for energy, whether it is other countries such as Azerbaijan, Norway, Canada, whether it is to find other means of alternative energy production means. And in the end, we remember the OPEC oil embargo of the 1970s. We cannot let countries in the Middle East dictate the way of life of Europe. And I think this is exactly a good path that we're marching in to get rid of this regime.
So, but how weakened would you say China and Russia becomes if the regime cannot deliver drones and oil anymore?
So right now, as I said, China and Russia are the indirect targets of these strikes by the US and Israel. Think of Iran as a major partner for China and Russia. They signed on strategic partnerships with Russia over the course of the last summer, with China 3 years ago. Russia and China 4 years ago signed a strategic partnership between themselves for an unlimited area of cooperation. And so getting rid, quote unquote, of the Iranian regime will entail also weakening Russia and China in turn. For example, China buys 90% of Iran's oil, as you said, for quite the discount. This is going to disturb the ties that China has in the Middle East, whether it's the Belt and Road Initiative that China joined Iran to, or BRICS that Iran joined to, the alternate to the G7. All sorts of initiatives that are designed to substitute NATO. And you have to also take a look in Europe at Ukraine. In the Russia-Ukraine war, as you know, Iran has been an active participant for the past 4 years. Iran has been supplying Russia with Shahed drones and other drones that are also targeting Israel and the Gulf countries right now. So you've got Iranian drones that are targeting civilians in the Gulf, in Israel, and in Europe, in Ukraine. And so Russia has been using Iranian drone technology. It has also established an Iranian-sponsored factory on Russian soil, on Russian territory, to manufacture thousands and thousands of these drones and ballistic missiles from Iran. It is also fair to say that as a partner, Iran supplies Russia with a passage, like they did, I'm assuming, during World War II, a passage of goods from the Persian Gulf all the way up north to Russia. So all of that is going to disturb Chinese and Russian sphere of influence in the Middle East, and in turn their efforts to undermine the American and European hegemony.
Thank you very much. Iran is the hub for jihadi terrorism in the world. They were behind this October 7th attacks largely. Here in Europe, we saw 2 Swedes being killed in a terrorist attack in Brussels by a man who's largely radicalized by a psyop coming out of Iran that is claiming that the Swedish social services is kidnapping Muslim children. So we have had a significant terrorist threat against Sweden, not comparable with, of course, Israel, but a considerable terrorist threat on Sweden. We have a terrorist threat all over Europe. This is largely driven by Iran. How would you say that what's happening now in Iran? How does that affect the sort of global terrorist threat?
Absolutely. I think Europe will be much safer when the Iranian regime is gone. And as you said, the IRGC and under them the Quds Force, their mission statement was to drive terrorism around the world. They call it the export of the revolution, but their means to deliver it was propagating terrorism around the world, and much of it was also as well in Europe. Remember in 2013, the Bulgaria terror attack that killed several Israeli tourists on European soil. Remember how multiple Iranian plots on European soil were thwarted, be it in Denmark against Iranian dissidents, be it in Paris when former Vice President Mike Pence joined this Mujahideen Khalq conference, whether it is everywhere, really across Europe, as you said, in Sweden as well. The regime and the Quds Force underneath it, really, their mission statement was to hurt Jewish communities in Europe, and in turn to have this leverage over Israel, saying if you dare to strike Iran, we will target Jewish communities around Europe. But then they also used it in general as a means to harm Jewish communities, because this is the fundamental nature of the regime. And they used it as a means to also intimidate and terrorize European decision makers coming to the negotiating table over the nuclear deal against the backdrop of terrorist attacks in Europe. They say, you know what, we don't want to mess with the Iranian regime. We're going to give them what they want. This is kind of an extortion method that the Iranian regime has been using. And I think this is why I said that the reaction on the part of some European leaders has been extremely disappointing. I would say quite behooving recalculation. The European Union is one thing, but the UK, France, strong European nations reacting in such an appeasing way is a testament to their unwillingness to face the threat head on. And to be honest, we can see the ramifications of mass irregular migration in Europe over the reactions of these governments, saying that, in my view at least, the presence of such an uncontrolled mass of migrants in their communities and the potential for eruption in so-called no-go zones and in the suburbs of the cities. We've seen recently in Paris, in Amsterdam, in London, these eruptions are an extremely complicating factor for those governments. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with a million people marching on the Westminster Bridge with the pro-Hamas flags and Palestinian flags. And they chose the path of appeasement. This is precisely the wrong path to choose. And as you said, Iran has been behind the October 7 attacks in Israel, where dozens of Europeans were also murdered and taken hostage. I just think that this is a time for Europe to recalculate and rethink its alliances around the world.
You're saying in the long run, if the regime falls, the terrorist threat will, of course, disappear. But in Sweden, the Iranian regime is using criminal networks, two criminal networks as we know of, to target Israeli and Jewish interests. In the short run, while this war is happening, do you see an increased risk of terrorist attacks in Europe or other parts of the world?
Potentially, yes, and this also behooves more vigilance on the part of intelligence agencies. The cooperation with the Mossad and other agencies in Israel is extremely tight. Israel has an interest to also help Europe to avoid terrorist attacks as part of the same Western alliance, but also to avoid harm to Israelis and Jewish people in Europe. And so the main priority right now is Iran itself. But in Israel, we are extremely vigilant for those, let's say, pro-Palestinian groups that may try to use the occasion that people, run to the bomb shelter dozens of times per day. The sirens keep going off and going off. To try to sabotage, and this is the role exactly of the domestic forces in Israel. And in Europe, the anti-terror squads and the intelligence agencies have to take it seriously, and they are, to really take a hard look at Shiite communities in Europe, but also in general, fundamental Islamist communities in Europe that are in general supportive of the Iranian regime. This really, as I said, Iranian regime on its way out of this world, hopefully. This also behooves Europe to take a renewed look at its alliances, to strengthen ties with Israel, with moderate Gulf countries, with the United States, of course, and to seize the appeasement policy toward migrant communities and Iran itself, because we haven't seen this contributing to the national security interests of Europe. On the inverse, it also led Europe to a weaker position strategically.
In Germany, they have shut down mosques with links to the Iranian regime. Here in Sweden, they have cut funding to mosques with links to the Iranian regime. What do you think about what are your opinion on the threat awareness from European leaders at this moment?
Very shallow and extremely unsatisfactory. And as you said, Sweden has been also under a terrorist attack correct me if I'm wrong, but in intercommunal or intergang fighting that led to a series of side bombs going off in Stockholm, in Malmö, for several years now, and it's been extremely dire. Yes,
but and this has then led to the evolution of that is that the Iranian regime is now using Swedish gangs to target Israeli and Jewish interests, which is catastrophic. But at the same time, we're seeing this criticism of the U.S. Israeli operation against Iran from European leadership. This criticism is based on international law. They're saying that what is happening now is in violation of international law. What is your opinion on that?
International law is such an overused term, as Marco Rubio said, hiding behind abstracts, while the other side completely, flagrantly violates all of those so-called laws regularly. You cannot fight terrorists with your hands tied behind your back. There is some abstracts, the Hague Convention from over 130 years ago, and some, the Geneva Conventions, all sorts of documents that were phrased in between politicians decades and decades and even centuries ago that are no longer suitable for today's world, where you have rogue actors like Iran and Venezuela who are flagrantly violating those very norms on a regular basis. And I encourage people to go back and listen to Marco Rubio's speech. And so mostly people who use the overused term international law cannot go back and specify articles and specific treaties that ban the prevention of imminent threat. On the contrary, I personally believe that national law supersedes all of those abstract treaties. If you have an imminent threat to your country, whether it's Israel or the United States, you are indeed free to act in a preventive way toward this threat. I have to say that in Europe, the way that has political decisions have been made in the past few decades, especially after under more liberal governments, has been extremely disappointing, because they don't have to choose between human rights and the fight of terrorism. They don't have to choose between being progressive and liberal and recognizing evil forces around the world. And there's distinct good and evil in the world. The Iranian regime is fundamentally evil. Killing reportedly over 30,000 innocent protesters is fundamentally evil. And if you have partners like the United States, who is acting in a preventive fashion against this regime, this is not equal. This is not comparable. And I would encourage those European leaders who are comfortably sitting in their palaces in European capitals, and they're trying to look the other way as millions and millions of migrants are inundating European capitals. I would strongly suggest that they recalculate their migration policy, that they arm up like Poland is doing, like Finland is doing, like many European nations are doing, that they boost their hard power investment, that they boost the defense investment, because we are living in a dangerous world. We've seen it with the Russia invasion of Ukraine. We've seen it with the Iranian invasion of the region. And, Israel and Europe are joining hands here as part of the same Western alliance against the rogue dictatorships of the world. I would strongly suggest to take a closer look. Remember European politicians in the past, even from your geography, let's put it this way, accusing Israel of terrorist attacks in Europe, instead of praising Israel for acting together to prevent those attacks, accusing Israel and the way it conducts its conflict with the Palestinians of terrorist attacks in Europe, sort of understanding and appeasing radical Muslims in Europe instead of taking it head on and distinguishing good and evil. So I would strongly suggest to take a closer look at how European leaders are choosing their allies around the world.